Russian Revolution was a prime example of taking a stand due to the surfacing of ideas that opposed the current Tsarist autocracy, the physical revolution that overthrew the government, and the creation of a new government based on the ideals of the original revolution. It was 1905 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Many people gathered outside of Tsar Nicholas II's Winter Palace, asking the Tsar to save them from the poverty and hunger that they had been suffering from. However, Tsar Nicholas sent his cavalry to attack the masses instead. This and many other instances of mistreatment caused new governmental ideas to spawn that would eventually take a stand against the current Tsarist autocracy.
People such as Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky were the cornerstone of the revolution because of the spread of their communist ideas. These ideas were taken from Karl Marx and Frederick Engels' joint work, the Communist Manifesto.
The Communist Manifesto's basic premise is that throughout history, society has always been built on class conflict. This class conflict is the idea that social order is split up into classes due to conflicting economic interests. In every section of history, there has been a class made up of haves and a class made up of have-nots. In the Middle Ages, there were lords and serfs. Looking even further back, in ancient Rome, we have plebeians and slaves versus the nobles and patricians. This ideology is best described by Marx and Engels themselves, for they write in the manifesto, "Oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to one another." Marx and Engels continue to say that if this oppression is too much and the social gap becomes too wide, revolt will occur. At the time of the revolution, the current oppressed people were the proletariat masses or the working class. The oppressors were known as the bourgeoisie, or the rich upper class running the state. Ergo, according to the Communist Manifesto, the working class people of Russia should revolt against the government to end the mistreatment and close the class gap.
These concepts were spread throughout Russia with the help of Vladimir Lenin and his speeches. This spread served as a catalyst that sparked the Russian people's desire for change and eventually to the physical revolution.
What was your question again?
How did the revolutionary ideas spread through Russia?
The revolutionary ideas spread through Russia because Lenin and Trotsky they read the Communist Manifesto and they were inspired by it. They believed that the socialist and communist ways were just they were good. They thought it was good for the working class. They saw how the Tsar treated the people in 1905. He sent his cavalry and he killed them. So what they did is they went around and they started giving speeches to an already mad populace. They inspired them to revolt and to just believe these ideas, and eventually led to a revolution that took down the Tsar.
The significance of the Russian Revolution was and is so great due to its unheard of nature at the time. Never had a stand been taken of this style. While other revolutions had taken place, none had been done with this communist philosophy, or been done for the working class to the extent the Russians did. The most momentous stand for the working class in not only Russian history, but in history's entirety was about to occur. The Russian proletariat masses were about to fight in an attempt to obliterate the gap between rich and poor. The Communist Manifesto best describes the motivations behind the revolt. In the words of Marx and Engels, "In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all."
Other than Lenin's ideals, there were many physical factors that contributed to the people's want for change. World War I, lack of food, and poor treatment of the working classes. The Tsar took people from the working class to fight in World War I. Along with this, there was starvation throughout Russia. This poor treatment created the resentment towards the government and the upper classes that led to the physical revolution. The February Revolution began on March 8, 1917, when women from textile factories took a stand in the form of strike. Many working men joined them. This crowd of protesters reached an estimated 200,000 people, which at that time was close to half the lower-class industry workers. In response, the Tsar called for the Cossacks, the military police, as well as his military to stop it. However, they were careful not to injure the protesters. On March 10th, the peaceful protesting turned violent when policemen and industry workers started killing each other. Soldiers started splitting up from the policing forces and began helping the revolutionaries. The remaining police were now terrified to be on the streets in uniform because they knew they would be killed if the revolutionaries recognized them as police. Because of this growing tension, In the escalation of violence, Nicholas II was eventually forced to step down from power. A provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky was then created to replace the Tsar.
Later that year, the October Revolution took place when the Bolsheviks physically took over the government. Although there was a provisional government at the time, the Bolsheviks forcefully occupied government buildings and formed a new government with Vladimir Lenin as its head. Russia was now under the control of the Bolshevik Party.
People welcomed this change, as most Russians did not approve of the provisional government. They felt like the provisional government had not done enough to change or improve the miserable lifestyle they had revolted to change. Now Lenin's party and ideas had begun to become popular throughout Russia. Lenin made promises to the people to get them out of the war, fix their food shortage issues, and give peasants more land. Finally, once at peace with Germany, and with Lenin returning, the Bolshevik Party had garnered the support of the people in the creation of a new government.
This new Bolshevik government was the culmination of the ideals of Lenin and the revolutionaries' drive for change. They had taken a stand, and this new government was a coup de grace to the old regime. In the words of Lenin during the November Revolution, "The labor movement, in the name of peace and socialism, shall win and fulfill its destiny." This labor movement was the working class of Russia, the proletariat masses who took a stand and fought for change. When the Tsarist autocracy mistreated them, they overthrew it. When a new government was reinstated, the people of Russia again stood up and pushed for another government, one that stood with the original ideals of the original revolution. The Bolshevik Party was that government. Trial after trial for the Russian people had finally netted what they wanted. They had finally severed off the withered roots of antiquated autocracy, and from that divergence sprang forth a bright new future, a future that promised peace, bread, and land.
Ненавистный тиран!